Good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to be here presenting this topic to this user group. My name is Satish Natarajan. I'm a senior manager in Deloitte's technology consulting practice. I'm a lead AWS architect and an AWS EMEA ambassador. I have over 10 years of hands-on AWS experience and currently hold all AWS certifications. Over the last 15 years, I've delivered a number of cloud and digital transformation programs for businesses spanning public, private, and financial services sectors. Today, I'm here to give you an overview of the security and compliance tooling and framework provided by AWS, and then provide a brief summary of two of the must-enable tools on the platform, GuardDuty and Security Hub. So, let's get started. From a security standpoint, you want to be able to look at your tools that fulfill 4 critical controls. The first is detective controls. Now, these establish the governance, risk, and compliance models the environment will operate within. So example here is using AWS organizations, where you can define set perimeter of permissions within which the users can operate in that AWS account. Or assigning tags to your valuable resources to help better control those resources. The second is preventive controls. Now, these controls protect your workloads and mitigate threats and vulnerabilities. So, for example, you could require MFA on deletion of sensitive data in an AWS bucket, or deny packets moving from public subnets to private subnets. Third is detective controls. These are the ones that provide full visibility and transparency over the operation of your deployments in AWS. So, logging all AWS API activity via CloudTrail, or alerting your cloud administrators of any AWS config rules that are not compliant fall into this category. And last but not the least are responsive controls. These are the ones that drive remediation of potential deviations from your security baseline. So automatically blacklisting source IP addresses when an attack happens is one of these responsive controls. Now, this diagram provides an overview of various AWS security tooling services and where those services fit into a security and compliance lifecycle. These tools serve the breadth of the compliance lifecycle to identify, protect, detect, and remediate, together with performing vital forensics at the end. So the first service that I would like to talk about in more detail is GuardDuty. GuardDuty is an Amazon detection service that collects log information and then analyzes it for potential threats, whilst providing the ability to use those threats to raise alerts and take affirmative action. It continuously monitors your AWS accounts and resources, discovers threats related to EC2 and IAM with no agents, no sensors, or no network appliances required. It also has built-in anomaly detection with machine learning. So where does it get all this information from? So some of the sources that GuardDuty depends on are flow logs for VPC, which does not need to be explicitly turned on to generate findings, as the data is consumed through independent duplicate streams. DNS logs that are based on queries made from EC2 instances to known questionable domains. DNS logs are in addition to the Route 53 query logs that are available. And Route 53 is not required for GuardDuty to generate DNS-based findings, but it's available. CloudTrail events. So CloudTrail history of API calls used to access the management console, SDK, CLI, etc. are presented by GuardDuty. So identification of user and account activity, including source IP address used to make the calls, are available. So how does it identify threats? So for known threats, these are identified through threat intelligence from the following data feeds: list of known malware infected hosts, anonymous proxies, hacker tools, and cryptocurrency mining tools. For unknown threats, this is detected through observing standard behavior over a period of time and tracking for deviations using machine learning algorithms. So when threats are identified using the approaches listed above, GuardDuty then generates findings. Findings that can be retrieved through the GuardDuty API. However, the main approach is to simply export the findings as CloudWatch events. GuardDuty continuously monitors logs without impacting performance or requiring additional infrastructure. It can be enabled with just one click, and GuardDuty can also consolidate logs across your enterprise. Enabling Security Hub will automatically ensure that GuardDuty findings are sent to Security Hub as well. So let's run through a scenario of an instance compromise. GuardDuty will be tracking the VPC flow logs, DNS logs, and CloudTrail events, and analyzes it against known and unknown threats. When it detects the breach, it will produce a finding, classifying it as a high, medium, or low event, depending on the severity. Also, depending on how GuardDuty is configured, the information is sent to Security Hub, stored into an S3 bucket, or trigger CloudWatch event. The diagram provides an overview of the typical flow of events from GuardDuty to take action on. So GuardDuty detects some issue which are sent to Security Hub automatically. Findings are filtered in Security Hub, and some are sent to Amazon CloudWatch. CloudWatch can then raise an event to a number of different targets to take appropriate action, as you can see here. Here is a scenario of an unusual activity from the internet, identified by GuardDuty on an application load balancer. Once detected, GuardDuty will trigger a CloudWatch event, which in turn calls a step function to perform two key tasks. One is to put the suspicious IP address into a NACL deny list, and second, to update the WAF rules to deny access at the front end from the suspicious IP address. This effectively blocks the attacker from accessing the system any further. Now you have the opportunity to perform forensic investigation on the resource affected. Forensics is an important part of security and compliance in the cloud. The following diagram illustrates how we can use GuardDuty, CloudWatch, Systems Manager, and Lambda to get the list of programs executing on an EC2 box, dump packet information, dump memory, and then snapshot the volume for future use. This allows you to freeze evidence in time for future use. This brings us to another service that I would like to talk to you about this evening, Security Hub. AWS Security Hub is a service for the identification and detection of threats. It acts as a central pane for accessing security and compliance findings. It ingests information from Amazon GuardDuty, Amazon Macie, Amazon Inspector, and is also capable of ingesting information from third parties. Security Hub continuously conducts automated compliance and configuration checks, aggregates findings, provides insights, and can take action on those findings through CloudWatch events. The following are examples of what Security Hub can detect. It can check if CloudTrail is enabled in all regions, detect if the root account is being used, or check if there are any open ingress routes. A CloudWatch event can be raised from Security Hub findings, as you've seen before in our previous illustrations. There could be a tendency to get overwhelmed by false positives on Security Hub. A common scenario is when internet-bound traffic on an EC2 instance is rerouted back through a client's corporate network and associated security tooling and firewalls. Now, this might look suspicious to Security Hub, but you can create an archive filter in Security Hub that specifies conditions under which an event can be safely ignored. What's important to note is that such filters can only be applied from the master account for security reasons. When findings are generated, you should consider automating the remediation action for important findings as soon as possible. However, Security Hub and its feeder systems may identify different findings, and it's difficult to prioritize one over the other. I have therefore listed a number of Security Hub alerts that should be remediated as a priority, as these are considered high severity alerts. As you continue to deploy infrastructure, as code hopefully, you can start operationalizing additional remediation activities. Again, I would recommend that you work through the remaining findings based on their severity as soon as possible. Okay, so I'm ready to start operationalizing remediation. What do I need to consider? Well, first, you should get your tagging right. Having a good tagging strategy is essential while writing procedures to remediate security findings on AWS. Once this is in place, finding infrastructure components becomes much easier. Next, work with your application teams. Every successful IT project requires security and compliance teams to work hand in hand with application teams. Bring them in the journey to secure the environment rather than calling them out when things go wrong. Work closely with the application teams and come up with a joint plan to remediate findings. And what about automated remediation? Well, automated remediation allows you to deal with findings in one of three different ways. You can either get them notify you, letting someone know when there's an issue. You can isolate, so remove access to the asset so it can be triaged and go through individual forensics. Or the third is to terminate and replace. Shut down or replace the instance that is causing the issue. If you're starting with an empty AWS account, automated remediation might be for you. However, for most customers who are actively using or even developing on AWS at the moment, this is often not an option. Therefore, start with a notify approach. This allows you to manually triage and resolve issues, potentially in the infrastructure cloud libraries, before considering using automated remediation. Well, that's all I had to share with you today. I hope you found this lightning talk very useful. If you wish to speak to me or get in touch, my contact details are now on your screen. I'd like to thank the AWS user group for this opportunity. Thank you all for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Satish. So I have Satish in the green room right now, waiting to answer some questions. But before we joined the call this evening, I had all of the people that are involved in tonight's Q&A and panel join Skype, and my machine just melted in a heap and started dropping frames. So now I have just the people that we're talking to join, and everything seems fine. But if we drop any frames and everything's a bit glitchy, then I apologise for that. Such is the nature of technology. What I need really is something like a 32 or 64 core M1 Mac. Apple, if you're listening, obviously you're paying attention to the AWS user group, UK. I'd like a really hefty M1 based machine, please. Thank you very much. So let's go over to Satish now, who's actually joining us on the screen. Hello, Satish. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Thanks for having me, John. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm not bad. I've got my Ferrero Rochers, although I'm actually not opening them up just yet because the sugar crash is real, and I haven't really eaten properly before we started the call because obviously it's quite difficult to present on a full stomach. Good stuff there, though. We've been working a lot with Control Tower and GuardDuty recently, and all of those kind of good things. Like, it's a really rich kind of set of things to use. Let's go quickly to the conversation on Twitch. So I know you've answered a couple of questions there, but I'm going to pull them into this conversation so that they're recorded on video for the sake of future mankind. So Jabbersoft, hello Jabbersoft, asked, as well as VPC flow logs and DNS logs, does GuardDuty monitor egress traffic logs from NAT or VPC gateways, and/or can we import proxy logs, for example Squid, to the tool to identify outgoing anomalous behavior? What do you reckon?
Yeah. I think I also probably mentioned that on the chat as well. So GuardDuty is basically focused on trying to make sure your AWS account is completely secure, and it's obviously looking into some of the logs that are, some of the key logs that I mentioned in the presentation as well, in terms of VPC flow logs, the CloudTrail, and the DNS logs, etc. Obviously, then Security Hub is the one that sort of incorporates anything that's available, including GuardDuty, along with any third-party sort of tooling that you want to incorporate. So, if you're trying to bring in some additional information in there, probably Security Hub is the way to go and use.
Gotcha. Jabbersoft, obviously, Satish is a Deloitte consultant. You're going to be getting an invoice for several $1,000s for that answer. We also have another question in the chat from Guns of Brixham. What about preventative controls? For example, infrastructure as code scanning like TFSec, open policy frameworks, etc.
So, I mean, in terms of bringing them in or incorporating them, I mean, I guess I said, in terms of using any sort of third-party integration, it's usually Security Hub that has that sort of capability to bring in those sort of tooling. I guess the question is more around, can we use them? Of course, I mean, you can obviously use some of these toolings to help and improve your sort of security posture and make sure your everything is highly secure and fit for purpose, really.
Yep, gotcha. I wanted to ask you, you've got 12 AWS certifications. How on earth do you find the time to study for 12 AWS certifications? And I guess, do you have any advice for anyone who's thinking about getting started, particularly people who were maybe interested by the Get a Certification challenge that we mentioned earlier on?
Yeah, it wasn't. I have to say, it wasn't easy. But I probably had the benefit of working hands-on on AWS for over a decade now. So I mean, I mentioned that in my presentation as well. So at the time when I actually started looking into, okay, how do I convert those into sort of credentials? I thought of looking at what certifications were available, and I started my certification journey on AWS since February 2017. And at the time, you know how certification is in AWS. It started out with just 5 certifications with 3 associate and 2 professional certifications. And having the benefit of actually working hands-on on AWS, I was able to sort of crack them, between 4 or 5 months. But then I guess as AWS sort of evolved and, with the innovation and more services and features that they sort of offered, the domain started growing, and I was quite interested in some of the new certifications that they put out there in terms of the specialty certifications in big data and advanced networking and other sort of things. So, I started getting involved in some of those, just wanted to broaden my sort of domain as well in AWS. And I started tackling some of those over, each one over 3 or 4 months, because obviously the scope is quite different and it was quite, some of the niche in terms of the topics as well. I mean, some of these certifications actually that I've done, have either been superseded or discontinued as well, and some have actually done recertification. So it did take quite some time for me to do that. I guess key advice and tips would be to actually do get your hands dirty on using some of these technologies and resources on AWS. I mean, if it means that you need to go and click on the console and go through some of the configuration wizards on whether it's as you say, Elastic Beanstalk or EC2, etc. By just doing it hands-on, you're actually benefiting by going through and knowing what are the sort of things you can enable, disable, and what are the sort of consequences of doing some things like that. It sort of helps with the exam and certification as well, because you're actually not just practical, getting technical, theoretical training, but it's more practical as you do it. So that would be my key tip, along with obviously going through all the necessary stuff. So you need to go through in terms of white papers and other things you want to read, but getting hands-on practical experience definitely trumps everything else.
Yeah, and did you, have you, like when the specialties came out, were you going for those as a way to learn more about that particular area, or did you decide for yourself that you wanted to get all of those 12, and that was the sort of the main motivating factor was the Pokemon catch 'em all aspect of it?
No, I mean, as they sort of expanded, I was quite interested in the topics when they came out. So, the next sort of specialty, or the first specialty that came out, was big data. And it was quite an interesting topic to do because it was the in thing. Obviously, at that time, big data was quite a new topic for people to get into. And it was an interesting domain for me to get involved in. So I started looking into that. And I guess the next sort of specialty, if I'm not wrong, in terms of the sequencing, was, advanced networking security. Obviously, key useful certifications to have in your belt. So it was, that was what I was more driven in. And I guess then subsequently, it was just trying to, as you say, trying to get some additional certification, but again, in different domains, which I thought would be quite interesting to do, because it's nice to know something something new, something more exciting in AWS. So like the machine learning one, for example. So that was my interest really, and I was just trying to expand. my domain and knowledge.
Yep, gotcha. Whilst we're doling out advice to people, which of course as consultants that's what we do, right? It's the nature of the job. So you've talked a lot about the tooling around security, so GuardDuty and Security Hub and so forth. But there's the other side to that, right? Which is the human aspect, like the people that are responding to these incidents and doing things with it. Like the alerts are one thing, but actually making use of them is another. Have you got any advice for teams who are getting started with getting GuardDuty up and running? Like what's the next step? How do we involve the people in the process?
Sure. I mean, I guess I would say I could start with a two-prong approach and then probably add in something additional to the end. So obviously you want to make sure that you've got the right skills in place to be able to understand how we want to respond to some of these events that are being triggered by GuardDuty and Security Hub. So obviously upskilling your existing teams and making sure they have the necessary skills to deal with such security events is probably one approach that every organization needs to look and focus on. The other aspect is also not to shy away from, if you don't have the skills in-house, then start leveraging and making sure you bring in external capability to support and help with that. Making sure you've got external involvement to make sure you've got the right plans and you've got the appropriate responses to different incidences tackled and covered. So I would say those are the two key things to look in-house, upskill, or look for external. But again, as I mentioned in my presentation, one of the other aspects that we could start looking into is auto remediation. So some of these things might be something quite simple and straightforward that you could leverage a Lambda, or leverage some other techniques to auto remediate some simple security findings. Either it's just simply putting in an IP address to block repeat offenders, for example. It's something that could also be leveraged as one of the tools to then sort of alleviate the operations teams to focus on activities that bring more business value for the organization. So, on top of the two things that I mentioned, this is probably the key one that I want to stress on, to see if you can auto remediate some of the things that you could fix.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the general trend in the AWS landscape, of course, is that once we invest all this time and energy in automatically remediating something, it becomes an AWS project the following year, right? So you over time you have less and less stuff to maintain because AWS are doing the kind of the undifferentiated heavy lifting, I think we call it, right? Around that stuff.
Absolutely. And also, if you look at the trend going forward, most of the operations team probably are looking into new technologies like AI Ops, for example, and that's the crux of AI Ops. Is pretty much is to look into how you can auto remediate some of the activities. Notwithstanding, obviously, the focus is trying to reduce the number of incidents that have been triggered. Yep. But how do you automatically respond to those is quite key.
Yeah, I think that there's a sort of mixed industry opinion about whether AI Ops is ever actually a thing that we will get to. I guess depends whether you listen to charity majors or not as a thing. I know we've got a couple of machine learning folk on the panel coming up, so maybe that'll be a question for you machine learning fans. Will we ever replace operations teams with AI? Who knows? Great, thanks, Satish. I believe so. You're an APN ambassador, which is something that I'm familiar with. I guess the audience may not be. Do you want to briefly sort of say what it is that you do around ambassadorship, and maybe if you've got a blog or a podcast or something to plug, let us know where we can find that.
Absolutely. So, as part of the ABN ambassador role, my role is basically trying to evangelize what AWS is about. Obviously, I do that within the firm. I also do that externally by, posting on social media. Some of the things that I do are mostly, writing articles, writing blogs, some interesting key technical knowledge in terms of what can be done on AWS, for example, or something around along the lines of how would people be interested in moving into the cloud and in terms of the cloud journey, whether it's to do with migration or being cloud native, etc. So obviously that's one other thing that I do. Obviously being on the user group at the moment is also one of the key things that I like to do in terms of presentations.
Going to get your points for that one?
Hopefully, yes, I should. Fingers crossed. And yes, that's. I think that's pretty much what I'm set out to do, and as an ambassador, and I hopefully am trying to fulfill some of those as we go along. So yeah.
Great stuff. Well, from one ambassador to another, Satish, thanks for joining this evening. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we will speak to you again soon.
Pleasure. Thank you
Thanks
very much.
very much.